Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host of Talking with Famous People and officer on various police forces. I'm going to watch a little bit of this, see what I think about it, and see if I have anything to say about it.
It's good to see you back for another extraordinary turnout. Today, Professor Judith Butler will deliver the second of her Tanner lectures, The Ethics and Politics of Nonviolence.
That's great. Thank you very much. Seems like, okay, I'm mic'd. Everything is okay. I'm, again, very pleased to be here, and I want to thank again the Whitney Humanities Center for its extraordinary generosity and the entire staff for making this a really pleasant and enriching time for me. I've enjoyed my conversations already with many of you, and tomorrow morning, I gather, we will have more of an open question and answer period. And today we will pay some attention to what we might call population phantasms as a way of understanding tacit, even unconscious forms of racism that underscore some of our more deliberate reflections on violence and nonviolence. Earlier, I sought to show that moral debates on nonviolence can take two significantly different forms. The first centers on the question of the grounds for not killing or destroying another, or others in the plural, and the second on the question of what obligations we have to preserve the life of the other or others. We can ask what stops us from killing, but we can also ask what motivates us actively to find moral or political pathways that seek, where possible, to preserve life. Whether or not we pose such questions about individual others, specific groups, or all possible others matters greatly, since what we take for granted about the nature of individuals and groups, and even the ideas of humanity that we invoke in such discussions, very often demographic assumptions, including fantasies about who counts as a human, which lives are worth preserving and which lives are not, and what defines and limits our operative notions of humanity.
Note right off the bat what she's not doing. She's not establishing any kind of a meaningful framework that justifies the value that it upholds. Right here, she's upholding sanctity of life, which is a possible value one might uphold. But you could also uphold quality of life. You could uphold autonomy. You could uphold liberty. You could uphold justice. These are different values. And which value you're upholding and which value criterion, the means by which you attain that value, you claim one ought to use, is critical in understanding what you're talking about. This person, right off the bat, I'm saying, doesn't have any idea what she's talking about. A lot of big words meaning nothing, because she doesn't even understand that she's ascribing to a specific value that she's trying to uphold, and that's a framework, that you can't just assume it, right? And there's all kinds of assumptions about the other, quote unquote. People do exist in local communities and in other forms of community, right? And the obligation that one has towards either one's community or distant others or some other quality like that, I mean, some other limiter like that, is very much open for dispute. But she's going to present it as though it's a resolved issue that one must care for distant others, and that the exclusion of others from our considerations of moral questions, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality is there are no positive moral obligations. There are negative moral prohibitions, and they are universal. And this woman is just talking out of her ass. I can tell already. She's just fucking talking out of her ass.
Etymologically considered, demography is the study of the way that people, demos, are written, graphos, or represented, and though sometimes that is associated with statistics, that is only one of the graphic means by which populations are discursively elaborated. By what graphic means would we distinguish between the grievable and the ungrievable? I suggested that the category of grievable lives might be useful as we seek to elaborate an idea of the equal value of lives, and that considering the unequal distribution of grievability might be one framework for understanding the differential production of the human, of who counts as human. To claim that equality formally extends to all humans is to sidestep the fundamental question of how the human is produced. We might say that for equality to make sense as a concept, it must imply that formal extension to all humans. But even then, we make an assumption about who is included within the category of the human and who is partially included or fully excluded. For that reason, we cannot take the human as the ground of our analysis. It is a concept differentially articulated in the context.
All right, so this is a metaphor. Nobody is actually saying that those other individuals that she's saying are being treated as not fully human. Nobody's saying they're not human. Nobody. she's saying they're being treated as not human because we treat them differently because whatever. But all this language she's using is metaphor. She's not making an actual argument. It's postmodern nonsense. It's all fucking garbage. It doesn't withstand a shred of fucking scrutiny.
Of inegalitarian forms of social and political power, and because the field of the human is constituted through basic exclusions, it is haunted by the figures that do not count in its tally. In effect, I am asking how the unequal distribution of grievability enters into and distorts our deliberate ways of thinking about violence and...
How do you determine grievability? Does each individual have their own level of grievability, or is it a cultural thing? Are you saying that we as a culture don't ascribe grievability to those people over there because they're brown or something, right? So, what if I grieved them when they died? Does that mean they have grievability all of a sudden? Oh, that's right, you're trying to exclude the fact that individuals make individual calculi. That in fact there is no such cultural attitude towards the other, quote unquote. That the black body is not disenfranchised. That there may be individuals who are obsessed with the make-believe of race, as you are, obviously Judith Butler, but that's just because they're idiots like you. You're a complete moron. You're a vocabulary-rich moron. You're an ENFP in this. I'm almost for sure you're an ENFP. Not that all ENFPs are morons or anything, but only an ENFP could be this vocabulary-rich and logic-poor. And that's exactly what Judith Butler is. Vocabulary rich and logic poor. She's got not a shred of actual argumentation here. She's talking about reification fallacies. She's talking about metaphors. And that's it. There's no substance to this at all. It's just social justice masturbation.
Violence. One might expect that a consideration of grievability pertains only to those who are dead, but my contention is that grievability is operative in life, that it is a characteristic attributed to living creatures, marking their value within a differential scheme, and bearing directly on the question of whether or not they are treated equally and in a just way. I suggested as well that violent potential emerges as a feature of all relations.
Note that there's no distinction there between a desire to preserve life, a desire to avoid suffering, a desire to execute good husbandry. For example, it would be fair to say that there's a distinction we make between humans and animals regarding this grievability. That some kinds of animals, like, very few people are you're not going to grieve the chicken you're eating or the pig you're eating unless it was your pet or something. So, what we learn there very quickly is that, oh, wait, that's an individual relationship to individual instances of life. It's not a general position. I don't grieve Joe's dog dying because it's not my dog, and I don't have a relationship with it. So, it is true that I confer onto a class of creatures a lack of grievability insofar as I'm aware that millions of animals are slaughtered each year for me to eat, and yet I am not actively trying to do anything about it or thinking about it or particularly grieving their deaths or anything, right? So in that regard, one can make a distinction between different species, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to do so. But even then, it's a metaphor because only individuals grieve. It's a reification fallacy. Groups don't grieve. Groups don't have grievability status. That is a relationship between individuals and other individuals of whatever life form it is. And once again, she's guilty of just devolving into pointless metaphor because she's a moron. Judith Butler, you wouldn't last 5 seconds in debate with me. Not 5 seconds. All those big words would fail you utterly as you stammer and clutch around looking for some sort of answer to the questions I'm going to be asking you. You would not last 5 seconds. Why? Because this is all a poem you're writing, a poem full of metaphors. There is not any real argumentation in this. You aren't talking about real things. This is just your moisture and your tenderness touching your dampness and creating a dew of wrongness that covers your entire body. So, go to hell, Judith Butler. God. Disgust me. You absolutely disgust me. To think that you think you're doing something with that writing, but you're absolutely not.